Hello, everyone. This should be enough time. I'm trying to make this video as short as possible, but it should be enough time to get to really go through the 15 sonnets of Petrarch. And the truth is there are a lot of sonnets by a lot of different people at this time. Petrarch is important mainly because he was part of the Italian Renaissance, which came before much of the rest of the Renaissance that we typically study. Very often we'll study it in British literature, but the British Renaissance, because it happened in the northern part of Europe, actually took place about 100 to 150 years after the Italian Renaissance. The Italians kind of got everything a little bit early. Mostly it was because they were on the trade route with much of the Middle East and the Far East, and so they got access to a lot of things before the rest of Europe did. They also had a faster shift in um, the middle class in Italy than in other places. Now, Italy wasn't exactly a country. It wasn't a unified country at this point. In fact, it doesn't become a unified country until the mid 19th century, somewhere 1840 something, I think, is when Italy becomes Italy. Until then, it's a bunch of little city states, rather like Greece used to be. But certain pockets of that area, Rome's included in that. Florence is probably the biggest, the hottest pocket, if you want to think about pockets. Venice was definitely one as well, because Venice had a strong foothold in the Middle East. A lot of Muslims lived in Venice, despite its, that it was part of this kind of Catholic area. But Petrarch was obviously writing in Italian, and this is a part of the thing that comes with the Renaissance. And it started with people like Dante, Alighieri, who wrote the Inferno. Instead of writing everything in Latin, which was typical in the medieval period, that most things would be written in Latin because most of the scribes were priests. Instead, we have a bunch of writers, Dante included, who wrote in what we call the vernacular. And that means it's their common language. It's the language that people speak, not the language of scholarly study, which is what Latin has been. And so he wrote common, in the common language, the vernacular language of Italian in this case, so that Italians could just read his stuff. You didn't have to be a priest to have studied Latin to be able to read all this stuff. You could have popular literature. And that's more and more towards the end of the medieval period, more and more literature was being written in the vernacular. So most Arthurian literature, most of the stuff about King Arthur and his knights were written in Old French, Old English, or Middle English. But they were, German. They were not written in Latin. They were written in common languages, in the vernacular languages, because they were for popular consumption. Ordinary people could enjoy those stories, even if most of them weren't really readers. But it also, having so many things printed in these other languages made it possible for more people to be literate too, having access to these kinds of things, especially once we got a printing press. Then all of a sudden, wow, you could buy a book much more cheaply than you ever could before. And so it really changed the nature of our reading ability. Far more people were likely to be literate, and that number would just continue to grow into the present day. Now, sonnets are a very particular form, and one reason I have this particular one. Just get through I want to get past the introduction because that's not what we're reading. I want to get to the actual sonnets. And the sonnets are listed in Italian first, and then a translation in English. Now, English is far harder to rhyme than Italian. A lot of Italian words end with A, and they have similar rhythms. So English is just, we do have a rhythm to our language too, but there are a lot of complexities that make it a little bit more difficult. But a sonnet is 14 lines of iambic pentameter. That's 14 lines, and usually there are 10 syllables per line. So in this particular thing, oh joyous blossoming, ever blessed flowers, oh joyous blossoming, ever blessed flower. So there's really 6 beats, but this is a translation. But if we go over here, lieti fiori e felice e ben nate erbe, it has bum 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 bum, and it has 5 beats, and that's really what we're looking for, 5 main beats. It's usually tam 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 tam. You could start with because I could, dun, 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 dun. But that's typically the rhythm, and it's usually has a very strict rhyme scheme. Now in this, you can see his are actually Italian's easier to rhyme. So that he goes A B B A, so erbe, sole, parole, serbe, acerbe, viola, sole, superbe. So it's really easy to find things to rhyme. So it's ABBA, ABBA, and then fiumi, chiari, lume, cari, chiari, costume, impari. So it ends up being essentially CDE, CDE, which is fine. That's perfectly fine. As long as it has some type of rhyme scheme, that's okay. The main thing that's happening though in these rhymes, I mean, and this is another reason why Petrarch is so important, is most of his poems and most of the poems that will come as a result of this, these poems are going to be love poems. Now, they're not the typical love poems. A lot of us will have, oh, you write your poem, dear honey, happy birthday, and you make them a little card and you write them a poem. Well, the truth is that this time it was very normal to write somebody. It was almost like writing somebody a song. You write them a poem and slip it in their pocket while they're passing or something, or have someone, who's a go-between, kind of like deliver it for you, and then maybe they reveal who you are, maybe they don't. Well, we still do things like that today. You can buy a Valentine, for instance, at a lot of schools and put your secret admirer. You don't have to reveal all of this. Well, most of these poets, though, what they ended up doing is they didn't reveal the object of their love. So very typically, the object of someone's love poem would be a person who is out of their reach, either because the person's married, or because the person's too wealthy, or both, or because the person really isn't even aware that they exist. So it's almost like the star-crossed lover sort of poem. But these poems were not necessarily meant to bring about any sort of like love between the two people. These are, this is how I admire a woman from afar. So there's a lot of physicality to much of what this is. And some of these you might even think, wow, these are almost like stalker sonnets, like I've watched you from afar type stuff. And you're thinking, okay, that's really creepy, but that was the standard. So if in fact, a few people broke the rules. Sir Philip Sidney in England broke the rules because he wrote a book, Astrophel and from Astrophel to Stella, and that just means that's a star lover to his star. Stella means star. And he wrote a series of 150 something poems to this woman who actually was unmarried and ended up falling in love with him, and they ended up getting married. And so he wrote a poem, and the poems all led to the fact that they actually wooed the girl, and he married her and lived happily ever after. But that's not normal. Usually you write poems to a woman who's unattainable. And so in Petrarch's case, we don't even know who half of these people are, but he was an admirer, I guess, of female beauty. And so there's a lot that's going to be, oh, you're so beautiful, and oh, you set life going, and you're the it could be that she's the muse for his poetry, stuff like that. But it's almost an objectification of women. So the women rarely, if ever, responded to these sonnets. And usually often they would never even have access to the sonnets. They'd be written about them, and yet they would not actually be delivered to them. It was all about male consumption of the female form. It's very odd. I know it sounds really weird, but that's kind of what it's doing. So let's look at some of these though. And so he says, oh, joyous blossoming, ever blessed flowers. And then she says and then he says, mid which my pensive queen her footsteps set. So he's admiring the flowers where she's walking. O plain that holds her words for amulets and keeps her footsteps in thy leafy bowers. O trees. So now he's admiring the trees because they're their earliest green of springtime hours all above her, and all spring's pale and tender violets. O grove, so dark the proud sun only sets his blithe rays, gild the outskirts of thy towers. So he's essentially, oh, everything, all the things that get to interact with her, the stream that mirrorest her sweet face. I envy thee her presence pure and dear. There's no rock so senseless, but I deem it burns with passion that to mine is near. So in other words, he's saying he envies all the flowers, the trees, the grass, everything, even the stream that she looks into because it mirrors her sweet face. And he envies everything because they must all be in love with her too. So often this is kind of like overdoing it a bit, if you want to think about it. But so he's like, I envy all the things that get to touch her because she's out strolling in the woods, and because they must all those different objects must be in love with her too. So that's kind of where he's going with that. Not an objectification of her, just saying essentially that they must all be just as enraptured with her as he is. Okay, number 2, when love doth those sweet eyes to earth incline. So in other words, when she drops her eyes. So they're looking down on the ground and weaves those wandering notes into a sigh with his own touch and leads a minstrelsy clear voiced and pure, angelic and divine. He makes sweet havoc in this heart of mine. So when I hear her sigh, when I see her eyes drop to the ground, all of it is like music to my ears. And to my thoughts brings transformation high. And then he says, so he loves so much just hearing her sigh that he says, my time has come to die if fate so blessed a death for me design. So in other words, oh, if only now I could like die in bliss. And then it says, but to my soul, thus steeped in joy, the sound brings such a wish to keep that present heaven. It holds my spirit back. So he says, oh, I see her and I hear her sigh and it makes me think, oh, I could just die. But then because she's here, I don't want to leave. And so I stay. The only thing that makes me want to stay on earth is her, this soul siren who with us doth dwell. Now, does it matter what she looks like at this point? No, it could be any woman. Then he says, sweet air that circles round those radiant tresses. Of course, again, it's air that's interacting with her hair. And floatest mingling with them fold on fold deliciously and scatterest that fine gold, so her hair is gold, that twinest it again, my heart's dear jesses. Thou lingerest on those eyes whose beauty presses, stings in my heart that all its life exhaust, till I go wandering round my treasure lost, like some scared creature whom the night distresses. So he's saying essentially, okay, so we're talking about the sweet air in her hair, but then it says it lingers on those eyes, and those eyes are what destroy me. So she's beautiful, and yet that kills me because I go wandering round my treasure lost, and I've lost her. I seem to find her now, and now perceive how far away she is. So he loses track of where she is. Now rise, now fall. Now that I wish now what is true, believe. And so essentially it's wanting to be near her, wanting to be around her, wanting, not to for anything else to get it's like jealousy for everything, which is really odd and obsessive. This is not healthy love that we're talking about mostly. Oh, there is another exception. There was another sonnet. It's called Sonnets from the Portuguese. And Elizabeth Barrett Browning actually wrote them to her husband, and they were like love poems when they got married. But most of these are from afar, so we don't even know that he's met her, like he's actually sat and talked to her, because we just know that he admires this woman, that he's jealous of everything that touches her. He thinks she's absolutely gorgeous. Um, and then he says to her that she goes, doth any maiden seek the glorious fame of chastity, of strength, of courtesy? And then he says, gaze in the eyes of that sweet enemy from whom all the world doth as my lady name. So in other words, this is essentially, if you want to know what all of those things are, then you would need to talk to her to essentially see her. So for her, there's honor, pure devotion's flame. That's what he feels. Truth is joined with graceful dignity. And then essentially that aligns her because she's seen from afar and because she's idolized like this, that takes her to heaven. And it's funny because there's actually at the beginning of the Inferno, which you read, Dante has this woman who essentially intercedes for him, and that's why he's being led through all of these things. Beatrice has decided his soul is at stake, that he's doing things to himself that he shouldn't do and that are unhealthy and that will get him not in heaven. And so she's interceded for him so that he can be toured through and he can essentially learn his lesson and do better. And so, but she's in heaven, of course. And that's kind of what this is a suggestion here too, is she's, honor with truth, pure devotion, graceful dignity. She has all these wonderful inner qualities too, so that she's definitely going to go to heaven. And it says there, she will learn that speech beyond all poet skill. That's his own skill, the poet skill, and sacred silence, and those holy ways unutterable, untold by human heart. So she will learn all of those things in heaven. But the infinite beauty that all eyes doth fill, this none can learn, because its lovely rays are given by God's pure grace and not by art. And so, but she already has all of this other beauty that's given by God. And so, but this is setting her up even more as this unattainable kind of person. Of course, right now in this next one, he's like totally all he's thinking about is her. And it's not the, kind of, oh, well, she has honor and good manners or anything like that. No, he's had dreams about her, and changeless memory. So the thoughts, the memories that he has of her, fierce desire, strong passion, heart weak with its own fire. So he's kind of burning for her. Oh, eyes of mine, not eyes, but living streams. So he's crying. He's weeping. And laurel boughs, whose lovely garlands seem the sole reward that glory's deeds require. And he feels like he's being, this is like, I'm only going to love her from afar? Is it delusion that I love her? And is it delusion that I think that there's even a chance for me? I'm being haunted by everything that she is. And I can't find any relief now. So I'm just overwhelmed with passion for her, which is, this is where we get more into the stalker area, especially if it's unrequited love. The whole idea of someone getting more and more worked up about it is kind of a little scary. But it says linger. He's telling her specifically, linger and see my passion and my grief, which is just a little frightening, in my opinion. And then we get over to 6. I once beheld on earth celestial graces and heavenly beauties scarce to mortals known. So he's saying he's seen these heavenly things. You could think of them as muses or, even goddesses to, essentially enhance creativity. That's why I say muses, because the muses are meant to help with poetry and singing and all sorts of other stuff. But then he says, I saw how tears had left their wintry traces within those eyes that once the sun outshone. I heard those lips in low and plaintive moan breathe words to stir the mountains from their places. And so essentially what it's saying is, I've seen the beauty of this, but now I've seen misery. So the tears, and this is within those eyes that once the sun outshone. So this is his beloved, and she's unhappy. Love, wisdom, courage, tenderness, and truth made in their morning strains more high and dear than ever wove soft sounds for mortal ear. So this is it, and we don't know, is she grieving someone, but she is grieving, and so in so many ways heaven is also grieving with her, and the very leaves upon the boughs soothe her. Such sweetness filled the blissful atmosphere. So even her weeping is pretty. Again, he's obsessing a bit, and then again he's talking about those eyes neath which my passion rapture rose, the arms, hands, feet, the beauty that erewhile could my own soul from its own self beguile. So essentially, he's starting to catalog all the elements. Again, the hair's bright tresses. So she is blonde, full of golden glows, and the soft lightning of the angelic smile. And so essentially, he's saying all of this that she was, and this is the key. This is where we get to the dark part. Okay. It says, all of this are now but dust, poor dust that nothing knows. And this is where we get to the darker half of the sonnets. The woman died. And so now we don't know, there's speculation, and there are certainly some articles that contend they know who this woman was. We don't know exactly, but there are several theories, but they will argue each other until the nth degree too. So, but he goes, and yet I live. Myself I grieve and scorn, left dark without the light I loved in vain, adrift in tempest on a bark forlorn, dead is the source of all my amorous strain, dry is the channel of my thoughts outworn, and my sad harp can sound but notes of pain. So she died. And this is kind of what happened to Dante with Beatrice. Is she was married to another man. He did write sonnets to her, but it was always that love from afar. She died pretty young. I don't know if she died in childbirth or what, but she died. And that affected some of Dante's poetry as well. Now, again, it doesn't diminish the love because it wasn't earthly love. It wasn't like physical, I want to have, relationship with you. It's this admiration from afar, almost like a knight in shining armor, but he's admiring his lady from afar, and they'll never actually be able to be together, if that makes sense. That's really the kind of love that this is all dealing with. And then now he's talking, of course, talking about her going to heaven. So she ruled in beauty o'er this heart of mine, a noble lady in a humble home, and now her time for heavenly bliss has come. 'Tis I am moved, mortal proved, and she divine. So she went off to live in heaven forever, but I'm mortal. I'm not dead yet. And he's just missing all of that. It might rain the rocks for pity for their doom, but everybody's weeping, and so's he. So they weep within my heart, no ears they find save mine alone, and I am crushed with care, and naught remains to me save mournful breath. So this, in some ways, it's almost like, I don't know, like The Raven or something by Poe, where he's going to be sad forevermore because she's gone. And so it's really interesting, in some ways too, even after she dies, because of the type of love this is, this person can still be a muse, because now they don't have the earthly image of her anymore, and yet that love for her is what will raise them above the norm. And so and now he's having a dream about her. Dreams bore my fancy to that region where she dwells. So it's like he's dreaming of her up there in heaven. Mid those who in the loftiest heaven be, I looked on her. So she was even prettier and less snooty than when she was alive. She took my hand and said, within this sphere, if hope deceive not, thou shalt dwell with me. So she's saying, okay, I know he's saying he dreamt about her, and she said, when you die, you're going to come to heaven and you'll live with me. thou shalt dwell with me. And then she even sort of apologizes. I filled your life with war's wild agony. Mine own day closed ere evening could appear. And so she's saying, I know I made you miserable when you were alive because, well, and then she died. But she says, she goes, I wait for you alone, and that fair veil of beauty thou dost love shall yet retain. So you're going to get what you want once you die and go to heaven. But then it says, why was she silent then? Why dropped my hand ere those delicious tones could quite avail to bid my mortal soul in heaven remain? So in other words, but then she dropped my hand and I woke up from my dream. So I didn't actually get to die. And that's what he's hoping for, so that he can be with her in heaven. So it's a little, I mean, it's still kind of dark, but it fits the whole Poe thing. If you think about Poe's the Raven and Nevermore, you know, how the poor guy ends up on the, you know, in a fetal position on the floor at the end of the poem. That's kind of where this is going. But then it's, again, it's chaste love. So and essentially this is going to continue. I mean, it really doesn't, he can still write all the poems he wants to her, because um, essentially what he's saying is, even though she's dead, loving her and having her as an object to admire saved his soul. And so he's of course going to be, and if she's coming to him from in dream cycles from heaven going, you know, when you die, you're going to come and be with me. Of course, that's, I don't know, it's still kind of creepy to me, but if that's what he's looking forward to, that's, again, this is the trope though. This is the standard at this time. You know, if you're going to love a woman from afar, then all of that love is going to be very holy. And um, essentially he's saying that when she goes up to heaven, then when she first got up there, everybody's like, oh my gosh, you know, what light is here and what new beauty dressed. Well, I've never seen anything so beautiful in my life come to heaven. And so she's an insta celebrity is what he's saying up in heaven. And she, contented with her newfound bliss, ranks with the perfect in that upper sphere. Yet ever and anon looks back on this to watch for me, as if for me she stayed. And so he's saying, I hope to be in heaven soon so that I can hear her call and must not be delayed. So he's still looking, again, it's that looking towards heaven, you know, that we're all going to be, you know, he and she will be reunited in heaven, even though they never were actually united in under, you know, in the mortal world. And so each one of these kind of deals with elements of this. And so, you know, some of it deals with time, like this has a little bit, some of it deals with the nature of what love is. Much of it, though, is, you know, it's all, of course, designed around still this woman. You know, what is it that she means to me, you know, and the fact that she's dead is really interesting, and it's one that happens, you know, it's happened before, but that this is part of the 15 sonnets is really fascinating, because he only gets through like 8 sonnets and then she's dead. She died. And then the rest of them are, oh no, she's dead, but what am I going to do? And so he's even saying, look, you know, no one could mourn you like me, you know, so everything seems to be doing fine. Everybody, you know, is getting back to the happy stuff. If thou my griefs against thine own couldst weigh, though, thou couldst not guess how long my sorrows last. So he's not getting over the fact that she's gone. So, you know, it's kind of like, and I've seen people do it where they're like, well, you know, the grieving process is only supposed to last so long. You know, like there's supposed to be a time when you don't grieve anymore. And that's just bogus. But he's saying my grief's going to last forever. Like, until, you know, what's going to change that? The only thing that's going to change that is when it says, yet may not all thy woes be named with mine. since she whom thou dost mourn may live, yet live, but death and heaven still hold my spirit's bride. So you may be sad about your person, but my person's dead. So I'm not going to ever get her back. And all those long past days of sad decline with all the joys remembered years can give still bid me ask, sweet bird, with me abide. So he still misses her. And of course, if you really love a person, you're going to miss them for a long time. But all of this is about, you know, keeping up appearances, keeping up, living despite the fact that she is dead. And part of it is writing her into immortality. That's what a lot of these poets saw as their job. They're going to write a poem so that she's famous forever. And what's really weird is he's famous forever in this. We don't even know who she is for real. So and most of us would never know her, even if it was one of the contenders, we would never know her by name. We even have a name for a kind of sonnet named after Petrarch. So, but certainly this gives a good idea of kind of what was expected. Most people followed Petrarch's. They didn't follow his sonnet form exactly, mainly because most of the other sonneteers were in other languages. But a lot of the sonneteers in English, they have, like Shakespeare has his own type of sonnet. And then we even have Edmund Spenser, who wrote The Faerie Queene. He has his own type of sonnet, which is a bit more complex. But they still wrote sonnets that were love poems to other people, mostly women that they could not have. So the unattainable woman who is chaste and fair and married and out of the guy's league. And so he can talk about how beautiful she is and how amazing. But yeah, most of those would have just been, remember, these are just poems out to somebody so that they can go, oh wow, thanks, this nice poem. But they don't end up in any actual love relationship, with a few exceptions. So if you do have questions after you kind of go through these, mostly you're not going to need to know like everything that's going on, but I would definitely know that she dies halfway through and that he has to deal with the fact that the person he's in love with is now a dead person and what's going to happen as a result of that. So much of it is pointing towards, well, what's going to happen to heaven? She will be my reward when I die, that she's waiting for me. So that love that can't be found in our regular world, but that idealized love can be something that we can get in heaven, which is really fascinating. So anyway, that's all. Let me know if you have questions.